Today we continue with our study of the unanswered questions, which is in SD 48.10, chapter 10 of SD 48. Today is part 2 of this 3-part study. Today we look at 10 questions, or sometimes 14 questions. The Mahayana text normally lists as 14 questions. The 10 questions are the kind of topics and questions that the Buddha doesn't answer, doesn't deal with, advises us not to have anything to do with them. If we are interested in meditation, if we are planning to meditate, or basically to be happy. Now, he's not saying they are good or bad, he's just saying that they are undeclared, avyakata, that's the word at the back on the board. Avyakata can be translated as undeclared, undetermined, unanswered, or better, unanswerable. They have no answer. It's anybody's guess. And if that's the case, then we're going to have a big problem, because anybody can say anything, and everybody thinks they're right, or only one person thinks he's right. So you can have a lot of quarrels and problems. So that's not conducive to mental cultivation. Of course, in Western philosophy, they try to solve this problem by having a discipline called philosophy, where you discuss things in the disciplined way, following certain rules, in an investigative way. Of course, the philosophy doesn't really answer anything. They will try to, but apparently once you have found an answer to a question, then they try to look for other problems. So that's the big difference between Western philosophy and the Asian philosophy, or more specifically Buddhist philosophy. In the case of Buddhist philosophy, or more specifically the Buddha's wisdom, if you like, is that he has found the answers, at least to the basic questions of our lives, and that's what interests the Buddha and should interest the Buddhists. So you have two ways of looking at this situation. One is to ask the right questions, and the other is to simply investigate. Whether you get the answers or not, it's not the problem, not the question. Yeah. So these 10 questions, the whole set is found in the sutta, quite a number of suttas, a couple of famous suttas. The Chula Malunkyaputta Sutta, M63, is one of them. This is where the Buddha is approached by this monk called called Malunkyaputta. He's the kind of archetypal intellectual person, if you like, someone who loves asking all the difficult questions, discussing very abstruse points. He made a very interesting challenge to the Buddha. He asked the Buddha all these 10 questions, and the Buddha says, well, I don't have any views on these things. And Malunkyaputta challenges the Buddha and says, well, if you don't answer these questions, then I will leave the order, I will disrobe. And the Buddha probably gave a smile and said, well, that's up to you, really, because did we have any contract when you became a monk that I will answer these questions? This is a very clear and pointed question the Buddha asked. Is it part of the deal? When you became a monk, was it that you want me to answer these 10 questions? Did I say I'm going to answer them? Because the purpose of monkhood, the purpose of the spiritual life, the purpose of being a Buddhist, it's not about discussing all kinds of controversial questions and showing how good you are in argumentation and so on. It's rather to clear the mind, to be happy. So of course, Malunkyaputta is caught there, but fortunately he is quite disciplined in a sense, so he listened to the Buddha, and the Buddha gave him a very important and long discourse. Of course, this monk is interesting in the sense that he's very intellectually inclined, and all his life he probably went around asking some questions until late in life. The good thing is he remained as a monk for a long time, and the last sutta about him, the last, just before his awakening that is, he comes to the Buddha and asks the Buddha, can you please give me a meditation subject so that I can meditate? I want to go into retreat. And the Buddha was kind of almost amused and kind of humored him and said, wow, what will the young monk think of you now? So why is saying that, why have you waited for so many years to go into retreat? So many other young monks have been coming and going and becoming enlightened, and here is this great intellectual who kind of took up the meditation retreat so late in life. Anyway, he was not dismayed. He was quite determined. He says, no, I know what the Dharma is now, and I want to go into retreat. And so the Buddha gave him the meditation subject. He went to retreat and became an arhat and became awakened. So this is the story of Mahapragya Buddha. Now, what are the 10 questions? Well, the 10 questions, or they also call it 10 theses. Right? 10 questions would be Avyakata Panha, 10 theses, Avyakata Vatu. Okay? So 10 ideas, 10 questions. The Buddha doesn't answer them because they are of no connection at all to the spiritual life. In fact, these 10 are the kind of questions that the people of the Buddha's time, even today, are curious. They like to ask this kind of question, although they're not really helpful. It's just a kind of, it maybe, satisfies your curiosity. The questions come in, you can say 4 sets. The first 3 sets are, the first set is about the world, the second set is about the self or the soul, and the third set is about the state of a saint or someone who has passed away. Now, you have 4 questions in the first set. The world is eternal, that's the first statement. So the question is the world eternal, right? That's the first question. The Buddha doesn't answer. Second question, the world is not eternal. So you find this is the opposite, right? So P, not P. And then the third is the world is finite. And then the fourth one, the world is infinite. So here you have 2. The first 2 is some kind of speculation about the world in terms of time. Is the world eternal or not eternal? So in this traditional 10 questions, only these 2 questions are asked of the world. Whereas in the Mahayana, they put all the 4 what I call alternatives. That means the world exists, does not exist, both exist and does not exist. And the last one, neither exists nor not exists. 4 possibilities. And then the next, the last 2 questions, question 3 and 4, or statement 3 and 4, the world is finite or the world is infinite, is in terms of space. In terms of space, is the universe limited? Is there an end of the universe? Or is the universe boundless? Well, we have again various opinions. So in terms of time, in terms of space. Here again, the Mahayana put these last 2 questions into 4, using the 4 alternatives, the tetralemma or the Chatuskoti. The world is finite, the world is infinite, both finite and infinite, neither. Okay? But in the original 10, they just only take the traditional 2, okay, the duality of on and off. So you have 4 of them, making altogether 10 questions. As the Mahayana, lay out all in full according to the 4 alternatives, so you have 14. Then question 5, or thesis 5. This section now talks about the self. The self is the same as the body, right? Self and soul identical. Body and soul identical. Number 6, self and soul are separate. Right? Of course, here you can again divide this up into 4 using the 4 alternatives. And then you find the 4 alternatives in the last 4 statements or questions, 7 to 10. This regarding the Tathagata. Here the term Tathagata is a pre-Buddhist term. It doesn't refer to the Buddha here. It refers to a saint or to simply a being, or maybe an awakened being or some kind of holy being. If he dies, what happens? to him, what is the state of what is the posthumous state of a saint? Does he exist after death? Does he not exist after death? Does he both exist and not exist after death? And fourth possibility, neither exists nor not exists after death, right? So I'm not going to go into the details about the nature of duality and Aristotelian logic here, because we already talked about this in the first talk, so you can go back and listen to the first video to get all those background. So here we have the 10 questions. So the Buddha answers all these 10 questions with silence. This is where silence is safer, and it actually is healing. Why is it healing? For example, we have Vachagota, another monk who likes to ask his 10 questions. Well, he asks actually 4 questions, the sort of about the self and the soul, using the Tatralemma, the 4 alternatives. He asks the Buddha, is there a self? The Buddha doesn't answer. Is there no self then? The Buddha doesn't answer. Then he says, okay, in that case, both there is a self and no self. The Buddha doesn't answer. And finally he says, in that case, neither. The Buddha still doesn't answer. So the man goes away after that. Now, fortunately, he's a very curious person. He doesn't give up. He comes back with other questions. Apparently, in the Buddha's time, it is accepted. It's an accepted way that the teacher may not answer. It's just silent on it. It's regarded as all right. Of course, nowadays you find someone doesn't answer is something impolite or off-putting, and we probably will never come to that kind of teacher again. So here you see a different kind of cultural situation, and we must remember this when we look at the 10 questions. So the Buddha doesn't stop there. He's silent. Of course, the Buddha stops there, and then nothing more is said. And we too will be scratching our head. What is this about? Why is the Buddha silent? So you have Ananda there, who was always there like a narrator, explicator, someone who is there for us. Ananda is there for everyone, in fact. So he asked the Buddha, for our benefit, why did you remain silent when he asked you all these questions? So the Buddha gave a very good answer. He says, well, Ananda, if I were to say yes, there is a self, Vachagota is happy, but then I'm going against my own teaching. But if I say no, there is no self, I'm keeping to the teaching, but this poor man is terrified. He says, I used to believe there's a self, a soul. Now there's no more self or soul, so what's going to happen now? Am I going to get into trouble? So here we have, in a sense, some people are not emotionally or psychologically ready for certain answers in Buddhism. That is why we don't always go around, especially during counseling, to tell people First Noble Truth suffering. Because this person who's come to you for counseling is already suffering. He's going through the First Noble Truth, so you don't have to tell him again. You're just stating the obvious, and you're kind of not helping. So there are occasions when silence will be more healing. And the 10 questions is such an occasion. At the same time, silence also is skillful, strategic, and this is the topic that the theme that I've used in an essay which follows this in the volume 44, which is already complete, called the what's the topic called? It's about the Buddha, the silence and the Buddha. The title is Silence and the Buddha, right? Why silence is so important as part of the teaching process. Silence can be strategic in the sense that when the Buddha does not answer these kind of questions, we tend to not to waste time discussing this sort of thing and quarreling. The main thing is arguing and quarreling, getting into difficult situations, conflicts, and breaking up friendships, things like that. So the idea is there are no answers to this thing. They're speculative at best. So just leave them alone. Discuss what really will help us to calm our minds and free our minds and help us in awakening. So by not answering these questions, the Buddha is stressing a point. You don't need to know this. This doesn't really matter. And let's get to the real problem. Okay, so this is the skillful approach. This doesn't mean that the Buddha doesn't deal with this kind of issues. It does. For example, I mean, there are occasions where it's totally silent, like in the Uttiya Sutta also you find the Buddha doesn't answer at all. And in this case, in the Uttiya Sutta, also in volume SD 44, it is Ananda who intervenes. Because when the Buddha is silent, unlike Vajragota, Uttiya was almost becoming upset. He's not too happy the Buddha did not answer anything. So to prevent that, Ananda at once intervenes and tells Uttiya, said, oh, okay, you know why the Buddha didn't answer all these questions? Because the question you asked is already answered and kind of, it's a repeated question and so on. And the Buddha deals only what can be experienced directly, direct knowledge in other words. So Uttiya goes away, although he's not satisfied, he's not too disturbed. Then later he comes back again a couple more times, and then finally he becomes an Arhat. So there you find the Buddha means business when he talks Dharma. He's not there to simply tell you what you want to hear, but rather what you need to hear, and to hear those things in a healing, ready way. At the same time, the Buddha also can go into very, involved and abstruse discussion. Take, for example, he lists all the possible wrong views or possible basis for wrong views in his days. In the very first sutta of the Digha Nikaya, the very first sutta in the Sutta Pitaka, the Brahma Jala Sutta. Brahma Jala, the perfect net. In other words, all the ideas, philosophies you can think of are caught in this net. So what the Buddha is telling, don't get caught in this net. It's very hard to get out of it. You want to meditate, you've got to free your mind of these thoughts. And very often, deep meditation is said to be avitaka, free from thought, thought-free. Okay, so the point here is that Buddha is telling us what is essential, what is non-essential in terms of spiritual cultivation. On a more philosophical level, you find these 10 questions are also related to the kinds of ideologies and philosophies of the Buddha's days or even of today. For example, when we talk about whether the world is, if we say the world is eternal, then we are falling for what's called the eternalist idea. The eternalist idea, that means, again here you have a big area of beliefs. Generally the belief is that there's something eternal. Maybe it's the self or it's some God figure and so on. So this is one idea. Okay, these are ideas, right? And then secondly, those who think the world is not eternal, the world is, will end one day. This is the idea or view of annihilationism. The materialists hold this kind of idea that the self and the body are the same. Our body is ourselves, so when the body dies, the self also dies. So this is our only life. So make the best use of it, a kind of materialistic kind of idea without any belief in rebirth or karma. And then you have the world in time and space, whether they are finite or infinite. And these are called the extensions, and they are found in the, as I said, in the Brahmajala Sutta. If you want more details, you look up the Brahmajala Sutta in the SD 25. And so you have various other views which connected with the 10 points or 10 questions. You can look up section 5.1 of this text here for more details. Now, the Buddha also doesn't answer this kind of questions because these questions are wrongly put. In a sense, they are trick questions. We are begging the question when we ask such topics. No kalo panho. Question wrongly put. Kind of questions which try to trick you, right? Whichever way you answer, you kind of get yourself into some kind of situation. A very simple example here. Someone may trick you and ask you, and this is found in some philosophy books, did you beat your wife lately? Someone said, did you beat your wife lately? I mean, you can answer yes or no, you see. Because if you say, yes, of course you've beaten your wife, you say, no, that means you didn't beat your wife lately, but probably you beat her before. Or you might beat her later on. So you have to say, no, that's an unfair question. That's a question wrongly put. All right? So that's a very mundane example. And of course, in religion, in philosophy, you find more serious examples. There's another question. For example, someone can ask you, are Martians green? So whether you answer yes or no, you are caught. That you endorse the idea that Martians do exist. So the only way is to no, I can't answer this kind of question. That is why some years ago, when an evangelist approached me and asked me, what do you think of Christ? I just say, I can't answer the question. And I don't want to answer that question. Please leave me alone. He got very upset. He says, there's something wrong with you. I said, no, there's nothing wrong with me. I'm very happy in not answering your question. Because either way will get me into trouble. So why should I get myself into trouble? Right? So these are trick questions, dilemmas. And the Buddha will never answer them. Now, of course, there's a very famous theory here. A theory that you might say is at the very foundation of Western philosophy. Descartes' idea, based on his saying, I think, therefore I am. Right? So people think, wow, this is a great statement. Of course, none of the philosophers are enjoying themselves knocking Descartes down. Well, that's the way scholarship goes. You become famous in your time, you write something, you say something, you come up with a theory, and the duty of the next generation is to knock you down, and then they come up with another new theory, and then it goes on like that. That's how they become famous and earn a living. But in Buddhism, of course, we do it differently. So what's wrong with Descartes' remark, I think, therefore I am? Very simply put, this is a loaded question. He assumes there is an I to think, simple as that. Where's the I? Right? So just looking at this alone, you find this statement is problematic. There's no I to think. If Descartes had known Buddhism, he wouldn't have made such a statement. So lots of assumptions here, in other words. So, but I'll just remain there and not say too much here, because then we end up talking philosophy. You can read up all this if you're interested. There are other sections, other books which cover this kind of area. So the question is, the point now is not is to avoid trick questions. They are not very helpful. They are dishonest. So these questions, in other words, are to help us find out more about ourselves. Maybe know about the world, but the world are our senses. So if we understand that, then whatever we ask, we'll come back to looking within ourselves in terms of meditation. So there is speculation, there is experience. And speculation goes nowhere, or goes everywhere if you like, in a wild goose chase. Whereas experience is something direct and clear, and that's what we can deal with. So in that sense, we can say Buddhism is empirical, okay? In a sense that are empiricist, where can we experience this? What do we experience? What is experience? What are the tools of experience? Things like that, yeah? Of course, we can simplify this question by saying, what is the all? The all is the world. What is the world? The world are our six senses. The six senses, six internal senses, six external sense objects, their respective consciousnesses, and then all the other things related to this set. Okay, so that's all we can know, and that's what we need to work with. So, of course, here I just want to quickly deal with each of the 10 points and maybe see why they're not helpful, what they're trying to say. So we have, for example, if you say the world is eternal, you fall into this view of eternalism, which is not very helpful. Yeah? And if you have the idea that the world is has an end, again, it's not very helpful, because then you fall into the idea of annihilationism. Then You think in terms of is the universe eternal or not eternal? Again, the best we can say at this point is we don't know. Even the scientists, they keep giving us theories, the theories keep on being revised. So an honest scientist will tell you whatever the scientists know today is at best provisional. I mean, no matter how good we can say, yes, it's based on facts and machine, but all these facts are measurements based on machines. So as the machines become more and more accurate, measurements get revised, opinions change, and so on. So in other words, science is still speculating, still searching for answers. Science is helpful, definitely, but it's not about meditation. So we are in different worlds. So I'm not saying, Buddhism is not saying science is good or bad. It depends how you use science, good or bad. But definitely the scientific mind is good. It helps us to think clearly, and that's something even Buddhists need to have, a clear mind. So this is where certain questions do get answered or do get changed, for example. For example, the shape of the world. In the Buddha's time, the ancient Indians and those who accept Indian Buddhism or the Buddhist scripture, they see the world as flat, as a disc. Okay? And of course, the ancient Indians went further, although the Buddhists didn't go that far. The Buddhists kind of left things alone, didn't say much, kind of accept that idea. The ancient Indians actually believed that the world is flat like a disc, and if you go too far away, you fall off the edge, and there are monsters down there will eat you up. And then this disc is supported by 4 elephants facing northeast, southwest, and the elephant, for some reason I do not know, stand on this huge, big cosmic tortoise. And when a curious boy asks this teacher, says, Guru, what does the tortoise stand? He says, foolish boy, don't ask anything. Yeah? It stands in the air or something, all right? So it's just like a God idea. So of course now we know that the world is a globe, it's a sphere, thanks to the Greeks and various other ancient scientists. Then the Arabs knew about it. The church tried to stop it, but then they failed, and then European science accepted the fact it is round, and the church accepted it. And then the Jesuits went to China. In China, you have the emperor's court. The Chinese accepted the fact that the idea the world is flat. And so did the Buddhists of those days. In China, they still accepted the world was flat. This was like in the 17th century, mind you, 16 something. So the Jesuits argued with them, and of course the Jesuits won. So this was a great embarrassment to the Chinese scientists, inverted commas. And after that, of course, they had to think very hard on the nature of the world. Of course, that's why today you find people like the Dalai Lama, who are enlightened in his own way, tells the world, says, well, we Buddhists are not afraid to change. I mean, if science proves us wrong, and it's a fact, we will revise that teaching in Buddhism. Especially this flat world idea, for example. So, of course, the Dalai Lama is very shrewd, he's wise, because he knows that there are not many things we need to change in Buddhism. Whatever we need to change are the stories, mythology, things that don't really matter to us if we are serious Buddhists or serious meditators. Stories about ghosts and so on, whether you believe them or not, they're not going to help you in your meditation, they're not necessary. But the essentials, the Four Noble Truths and Eightfold Path, there's no need to change any of these. So those are the essential questions, right? Of course, in modern times also, you have religions that still demand faith from their followers. So this is where it's opposite in Buddhism, in a sense. Of course, in Buddhism, we do allow faith too. There are people who have faith, and they're quite happy with whatever the Buddha teach. The Buddha says, fine, I mean, if that's the way you feel is right, certain things you can accept. For some impermanence, you can accept out of faith or out of wisdom, as stated in the Anicca Chakku Sutta as 25.1. But otherwise, we need to question and counter-question again and again to find out what really is going on here. And in that way, when you ask, then you will get the right answers. Or maybe you get the wrong answers, but you still learn something from it. You begin to understand the nature of experience. This is what suttas like the Kesaputiya Sutta is about. The Kesaputiya Sutta A3.65 is telling us what are the things we can know, how can we know things. And those are the ways we should find out what the world really is. Not to be speculative, but to learn from direct experience as much as we can. Now what's interesting here is, what do you mean direct experience? If we are not awakened, all we can use are our five senses. Of course the mind is behind the five senses, but the mind is heavily dependent on the five senses. All that we can know are what we see, what we hear, what we smell, what we taste, what we touch. But even then we can be fooled by such things. So this is where the Buddha says, be mindful. So at least if we understand the precepts, we keep to the precepts, we're not going to be fooled by the body because we restrain ourselves. And then when the body is restrained, the body is calm and peaceful, then we build a peaceful mind. When the mind is more peaceful, it becomes clear, it becomes clearer, then we're able to use our minds to see directly what we miss by looking only on the surfaces of the five senses. Then we have a direct experience which goes right through the five senses. It's called insight. The sight into things, and we begin to see things as they really are. This is the purpose in Buddhist meditation. So again, the next area is about the self, the soul. Here again, the Buddha rejects all notion of self and soul for the simple reason it doesn't exist. It is just an idea people invent. If you invent, why do people invent the soul idea? Because they fear death, they fear extinction, they fear impermanence. So they say, oh, there must be something permanent. And once you have something permanent like a soul, they say, well, then somebody who invented it? Okay, we create another idea. There's a God idea that created the soul. So these are all very speculative and not really helpful. Right? So the Buddha said, why don't we cut to the chase? Why don't we go direct to the point? There's no self. Because whatever exists must exist in time. Therefore, whatever exists is necessarily impermanent. So if there is a self, the self also is impermanent. So it is important to understand here is the Buddha doesn't totally reject the self or the soul if it is defined as something impermanent, as a process. What the Buddha rejects is this idea that there is this eternal self, eternal soul that doesn't change, that is fixed. No such thing. Alright? So the idea of change is universal, simple as that. It goes against reality. The Buddha is not introducing any ideas here. He's saying this is what I see around me, and I'm showing you this discovery. I'm sharing with you this discovery. I didn't make it so. So in that sense, he's a scientist, if you like. As far as 2,500 years ago, a kind of scientist. So he has an empirical mind in that sense as well. This is what we can know. That's all you can know. So don't distort this and don't make it bigger than what it is. And of course, those days there were many teachers. I mean, the Buddha's time was a time of intellectual turmoil. Anyone can come up with any ideas that they want. It was a time where the country was becoming more united. People could travel more easily over wide areas of India. So you can imagine a small exchange of culture, and more people met together, and the economy was rising. People had more free time, and there were wars also. So, in other words, there was this great mobility of people, and people began to ask all kinds of questions. Some of the most bizarre philosophies arose in those days. So, in a sense, the Buddha was silent because he didn't want to get caught up with this kind of bizarre speculations like the other philosophers and teachers of his day have fallen into. and also, in a sense, to prove them wrong so that they don't mislead people, right? Then you have this the question of the state of a saint who has passed away, and this is in a sense quite real, because, for example, in the case of the Buddha, when the Buddha passes away, or an Arhat, does he still exist, or does he not exist, or can we say both exist and not exist, or neither? The Buddha said none of this apply. Oh, by the way, there's also a note that says even the fifth possibility still does not apply. In other words, don't try it at all. Right? In other words, none of the four applies. Even that is not the answer. So the idea is just don't use it. It doesn't work. It's just that's not the way the teaching goes. So Malankyaputta, of course, in the end, kind of had to listen to the Buddha, that the 10 questions not going to be helpful. The Buddha took a lot of trouble to explain to him why. The Malankyaputta Sutta is not really about the 10 questions, it's more about the purpose of the spiritual life. What do we really need to do right now as practicing Buddhists? So we have the famous parable of the man with a wounded with a poisoned arrow. So here the Buddha says, imagine, it tells Malankyaputta, a man has been shot with an arrow which is dipped in poison. And here he is, as he's lying down painfully, and he says, no, a surgeon comes along, there's a special surgeon who removes arrows, but he says, no, don't remove this arrow until I know what kind of arrowhead is it. And then the whole list of materials are listed in the sutta. You have a very good idea the kind of arrows they had in those days. And then what kind of shaft is it? And again, different kinds of wood is used. So it's amazing. The Buddha knew all these kinds of warcraft. What kind of shaft, feather from what kind of bird, that the arrow had. And then which direction it came from, who shot it, the man, which caste is he from, which class, tall, short, fat, thin, dark, and so on, all the possible lists. So, of course, this is sort of a theater of the absurd. It's a very entertaining kind of story, and it's, in a sense it's meant to entertain and also to educate. The Indians love stories. So the Buddha is saying, well, if this person asks all these kinds of questions and doesn't get the arrow out, what's going to happen? It's going to die, it's so obvious. So Malankyaputta, of course, understands this parable very well. So, what's this story all about? What needs to be done here? The arrow must be pulled out immediately, no questions asked. So also, when we take up the Buddhist training, we need to ask the right questions, right? But if we don't ask questions, that's fine too. But the important thing is, we need to follow the 3 trainings. Number 1, the body. We have a body, and this body needs to be calm. That's the first urgency. Then the mind must be calm. When body and mind are calm together, then wisdom arises. And this wisdom helps us to be free from itself, be free from suffering. So that is what Buddhist training is about. Not asking who shot the arrow and so on. Then we have another famous monk who comes and asks the Buddha the 10 questions. It's called Vacchagotta. Now in the Agi Vacchagotta, Sutta M72, the 10 questions are again listed. Now this sutta is called Agi Vacchagotta. Fire, Agi is fire, because the central parable in the sutta is fire. Okay. Now this is what happens. So Vacchagotta asks the Buddha 10 questions. The Buddha says, no, I have no views at all on these things. And at the end of it, Vacchagotta still is not satisfied, understandably. But in this case, it didn't go away. So the Buddha told him, okay, Vacchagotta, why these 10 questions cannot be answered? Oh yes, he asked the Buddha also the state of the saint, where does the saint go? In modern times, you might ask, okay, if someone enters nirvana, where does the consciousness go? where does he go? Right? So the Buddha says, Vajragota, here, look at this fire. And he put out the fire. Okay? See, where's the fire gone? Has the fire gone north, east, southwest? Of course, Vajragota here is quite wise. Okay, so this is where, depending on the person's wisdom, the Buddha would answer further or be silent. So the third reason for his silence is the other party is not wise, not ready. So in this case, Vajragota was wise enough. The Buddha says, where did the fire go? The fire is put out, where did the fire go? And Vajragota says, the question does not apply. Wrong question. In fact, to say where does the fire go is itself wrong. You notice? Because there's no more fire. See? The fire already put out, you say, where does the fire go? There's no fire. So, using this analogy, Vajragota understands what the Buddha is trying to say. But what does this mean to us in modern times? So in our times, in philosophy, we say this is a problem of category. Problem of category. It's a wrong category. When fire goes out, you don't say it's gone anywhere, because that's it, it just goes out. So, anyway, coming back to the sutta, the Buddha says, why does he not hold such a view? Because they are speculative. So, and he says famously in M72, section 14, it is because this speculation is a wilderness of views, a twisting of views, a wriggling of views, a fetter of views, attended by pain, by conflict, by misery, by fever, not conducive to revulsion, nor to fading away of lust, nor to cessation of suffering, nor to inner peace, nor to super knowledge, nor to self-awakening, and the last is most important, nor to nirvana. It doesn't conduce to attaining of nirvana. In other words, it keeps us being caught in the world, in suffering. So here, let's just examine two very interesting points which are very common, universal, a bit Aristotelian if you like, the duality of existence. Binomial approach. Something exists or not exists, on, off. And this whole system, mathematics and cybernetics, the computers are based on this idea. All right. In fact, I once asked a maths professor, a friend of mine, about the four alternatives. He says it's impossible for science to adopt it. Because if science adopt it, the whole mathematical system we have now will collapse. Because you can't have four states of truth. There can only be two, the Aristotelian duality. The point is that the four alternatives are not meant to be what you call states of truth in the Aristotelian sense. They are just what you call how true or false that the philosopher or the speaker is talking, and to point out wrong views. That's the purpose. It's not to create some kind of grand idea of the nature of mathematics or computer science and so on. So definitely the Buddha did not intend it to be used in that way. Now, it is interesting to just look to what you mean by saying something exists, something doesn't exist. All right? And we have to be more clear about how we use language to express this kind of statement. Now, when you say something is, you're using a verb to be. Is, are, was, were. Okay? Verbs to be, because this kind of verb states something exists. On a simple level, what does it mean exist? We can say, we can, in Buddhist philosophy, we can sense these things through one of our five senses, five physical senses. Then we say, it exists. Like for example, I can see this cup. Okay, it exists. Sight, right? I can hear a sound. It is. What kind of sound? I can smell something, taste, and so on. Right? So because of five senses, yes, we say this thing is, right? That far, fine, no problem. But you're going to have a problem once you start saying even a simple sentence like a cat is an animal. Okay? Yeah, of course, we might think there's no problem there. It's a perfectly correct grammatical sentence. That's true. But this sentence is helpful to us to show how is works. A cat, and then your is animal. So if you remove the is, you put an equal sign there, it works just as well. A cat equals an animal, right? So what we are doing here, we say cat and animal are the same thing, same category. So you have two categories, you say they're the same thing. Of course, we're not totally wrong here, but of course, you go into logic, you have what's called the major premise and so on. Animal is a bigger category. Cat is just one, right? So we can say a cat is an animal, but not all animals are cats, right? So you have that kind of problem. Okay, there you come to a logical problem. We're not going to go into that. But here my point is how is works. Is like an equalizer. Is, are, was, were. So can you imagine if someone says to you, you are a bad person, or I am a bad person, there is using the verb to be. That means it's not saying, it's talking about totality. I equals bad, you equals bad, whatever. Now we say that kind of language is wrong, because we are not bad from day one until now. We kind of go up and down. We are different at different times. So where verbs to be do not reflect the reality, we can never say someone is all the time bad or all the time good. So when we say, I don't like this person because he is bad, we're not telling the truth. So we have to redefine. In counseling, we teach the client to redefine. Can you be more exact, we say. So don't say, my husband is bad. Why is he bad? Yeah? Okay, then maybe you might say, he comes home late at night, that's why he's bad. He beats me up, that's why he's bad. Okay, that's fine. Then you have conditioned, you brought yourself down to clearer details and not to make summary statements. So this is the problem of is. For example, if we say God is good, can you imagine what problems it raises? There's so much suffering in the world. So how do you see that as good? A very simple example of the problem of evil. So that is why we cannot say nirvana is anything. He will say nirvana is what? So we can't talk about nirvana in that way. At the same time, we cannot say nirvana is not either. Because when you say is not, you must also add something else. Is not what? Right? For example, you can say, I am not an animal. I am not a ghost, right? So once you talk nirvana in terms of not, you're again comparing it with something. Then nirvana becomes relative, subjective. You have another, that means it's not real nirvana. So you can't talk of nirvana in terms of exist, not exist. This is put very simply. As far as our language and mind can understand, insofar as we are not awakened. So, because of this, the Buddha tells Vajragota, says, look, it's not so simple. You can't really talk of nirvana in this way, because it's just like the fire. All these statements don't apply to nirvana. And it's like a great ocean. It's huge. There's so many things that we have, that you can't really pinpoint an ocean. It's so huge. Now, category mistakes are good to, it's useful to understand each of category mistakes so that we don't make wrong kinds of religious statements. And in fact, very often, many of our personal problems arise because we speak wrongly. We use the wrong kind of language. And there is a whole new philosophy, a whole new psychotherapy system called ACT. ACT, Acceptance Commitment Therapy, which says that our troubles are made basically on the way we use language and the way we think, how we use words in language. So it's good to understand the nature of language. So category mistake, in other words, is when you put the pieces wrongly. And a very amusing example here, a very simple example by this famous British philosopher, 20th century philosopher called Gilbert Ryle. In his book called Concept of Mind, published in 1949, he gives this rather amusing anecdote. He says, a foreign tourist is shown around all the colleges, libraries, and other buildings of Oxford University. Then the tourist asks, but where is the university? Okay? Now he's brought to show all the little buildings. Oxford, they've got so many buildings, you know. So he asks, where's the university? His mistake is to think that the university is itself a building, such as the library and colleges, rather than the institution to which all these buildings belong. Right? So that's a category mistake. He thinks that university is just a building. I can give another very interesting, simple example. Right? There's this group of people, they're going to the forest monastery. Let's say it goes to Northeast Thailand, go to Ajahn Chah's center, let's say. So they go to many hours of journey from Bangkok or from Chiang Mai, and then finally the bus stops. The driver stops and says, okay, everyone's wondering why the bus stopped. The driver says, we have reached the destination. Everyone looked out. They couldn't see a single building. And yet the driver said, we have reached the meditation center. And they all came down rather befuddled. And they look around and you look carefully through the trees, they can see little huts here and there. And then somewhere a little further in, there's a bigger building, which not very big in fact, just enough for maybe 10, 20 months or 30 months to gather. And that's the forest monastery. I would expect a forest monastery to be look like Empire State Building, or even like this building we are in now in the Bukit Timah shopping center. So again here we have wrong concepts of what a temple is or should be. It's called category mistake. Buddhism is not a temple, right? Buddhism is not even a person, so to speak. Buddhism is peace of mind, and so on. So this is very important to know, to see categories correctly. So whenever questions are wrongly put or statements are wrongly made, the Buddha will say, no kalo panho. Wrongly put. No? Make sure you ask your questions correctly. So when a question, so how do we question rightly? When we question rightly, it's always to first of all, to pay attention right here and now, what's going on here. And we have to ask, what is it that I'm listening to now? What's going on right now? I think the safest answer we can ask is perhaps, why? Why? Yeah? Of course, you can ask what if you like. What is the first noble truth? What is there around us? What's the meaning of life? And then why is the craving, number two. And then you have, in the end, there is again another what, that is nirvana. What is liberation? And then you have the how. That's the last question. The four noble truth. The path, the Eightfold Path. How do we get out of suffering? So in other words, the kind of question we should ask should free us from our doubts so that we can proceed to improve ourselves. That's very important. So if we do know, for example, how many people there are in Singapore, or what kind of weather is there in some other parts of the world, and so on, it doesn't really help us. Yes, it's useful in other things. I'm not saying it's totally useless. If you are doing meditation, you just have to find out what's going on inside you. Those are the kind of questions you must ask. So, in other words, here we are not asking about questions of being and non-being, ontology. We're asking questions about epistemology, about what can I know and what I cannot know. So all that we can know arise through our five senses, and the mind makes sense of it. If you reflect on that, then you begin to ask the right kind of questions. Alright? So there you are. I'll stop there. The next week we'll finish off with the last part. Okay. So let us do a short reflection at this point. And once again we are gathered here to look at the very open teachings of the Buddha, to inspire us to ask questions, and to learn to ask the right kind of questions. Because when we ask the right kind of questions, then the questions themselves point to the answers. But sometimes silence also is the answer, because in that silence we begin to see our own minds and how we think. Reflecting in this way is very good karma. By the power of such good karma, may we enjoy peace of mind and wisdom in this life itself. And above all, may we attain spiritual liberation, namely stream winning, in this life itself. In this moment of peace, to let us shine our loving kindness to everyone here, to all those, to our loved ones and family, and to all those whom the Dharma have not touched, that they may see the Dharma and be truly happy and good people. May all beings be well and happy. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Anything to ask?